aquaculture. Let me say in my brief reply at this stage, Mr. Speaker, that all of the observations that have been made certainly have to be taken into consideration, because this industry, Mr. Speaker, as is demonstrated by some of the comments and my own earlier comments when I spoke in this sectoral debate, suggests that despite the problems, we have a very potentially dynamic industry. And it's the way we deal with it that is going to be of importance. Now, I just want to make the point, Mr. Speaker, that the concerns expressed by the member concerning the issue and concern of the establishment of additional agencies or vehicles, I just want to point out that the establishment of the authority will be a replacement of this present system of the division. It is felt that the industry is so large and potentially can be so much larger, especially if we get really serious about the blue economy and really serious about deep sea, deep ocean fishing, that we believe that it will be more efficiently managed by having this authority.
Sorry, Mr. Schultz, we're having some problem with you not having a mic properly. The Hansard people are having some difficulty. Could you get another?
Is that my problem or yours?
Not mine, this time.
Oh, okay.
Not mine this time. The Hansard's time.
Right, okay, thank you. Mr. Speaker, I want to give as an example the fact that in the present system, the decision-making in relation to licensing is really placed effectively into the hands of one person. And that in and of itself can constitute difficulties and imperfections in management. That now within the authority will be of course, the ultimate decision of the authority as to how it will operate, but it most certainly will no longer reside in one hand. You have a board that will be part of a transparent system to set up a process that is considered to be fair, that would involve, no doubt, perhaps a committee that would be required to deal with issues of licensing and so on, taking it out of the one-person sort of dictator approach. We believe, Mr. Speaker, that the authority in itself will be more autonomous, will be able to have the necessary resources in terms of personnel and all that to carry out adequate due diligence. And you know, one of the first things that the authority is going to be empowered to do and required to do is to deal with the question of a very critical and serious review of the regulations, because we've already identified that our regulations are antiquated and are not at all in line with global trends. And I'll give an example of that, because right now there is the question of exploiting a new opportunity for exporting live lobsters to China, right? Other territories using more up-to-date regulations are finding mechanisms to get their live lobsters out and moving much faster to China. We have our hands tied up here, and we have to find a way to smooth out the regulations so that we can be competitive. Because that's an area, for instance, as I told a group of fisher folk in St. Anne last week, that if we perfect the system of getting live lobsters exported to China, that the fisher folk can earn between 2 and 3 times more than what they earn now. That's it. 2 to 3 times the earnings potential. So we can't fool around with these opportunities, Mr. Speaker, because these opportunities mean not just money in the hands of large exporters, but to the extent that we acquire and have partnerships with our small fisher folk to get those live lobsters from them within real time and under specific conditions, those fisher folk will be able to substantially increase their income. All of that, all of those details have to be worked out, and I want to give this honorable House the assurance that we are not even going to wait on the establishment of the authority to make sure that we start changing our practices in relation to this industry. Absolutely important. The point has been made about establishing more fish sanctuaries, and I agree with that, an absolute necessity for the creation and appropriate preservation of those fish sanctuaries. I want to make the point also that even as we are talking about the near shore, the fishing, the sanctuaries, and the blue economy, now that in terms of the blue economy, that deep sea fishing is an area that we really have to encourage our entrepreneurs to look at in a very, very fundamental and serious way. We have to find ways we can develop partnerships between large fishers and small fishers, but that vast ocean is out there. It's said that in this hemisphere, the value of what is in the ocean on an annual basis is about 400 billion United States dollars. That is the estimate of the value of what is in the blue economy. Absolutely. So, billion, not million, sir. Not million. Billion US dollars. You heard me. I know it might be hard to wrap your head around it, but it's not $1 million. It's billion dollars, billions of dollars. Okay? No, that's the Western Hemisphere, the Caribbean. Yeah. So, Mr. Speaker, also the question, the issue was raised about infrastructure. Building out the necessary infrastructure. Right now, in fact, we have had to actually abandon a particular site right now for lobsters and are negotiating with the port facilities to move the location because the present location was actually failing in a number of ways. The structure, the phytosanitary conditions were inappropriate, a number of things, and we actually have to move, we have to change the location. So, Mr. Speaker, I just want to say that part of a serious part of moving our country from poverty to prosperity has to be to carve out an opportunity for such a large number of our fisher folk and people who are dependent on this industry. And it is something that will require effort, time. That's why, in addition to the Fisheries Authority, we are establishing an advisory board. The minister, this is to advise the minister. And we are going to make sure that that advisory board has people of competence, knowledge, specific areas. I want an expert on deep sea, deep ocean fishing too in there. I want some serious advice because we're going to find and plot the path to create some serious revenue and earnings from this industry. It is out there, alive and well, waiting to be exploited. In terms of the appeals tribunal, we feel, Mr. Speaker, that it is necessary to have that appeals tribunal in place to ensure fairness in the whole question of how we manage the affairs of the fisheries authority and in the decision-making process in terms of granting of licenses and so on. I want to just say, as I wrap up and make two proposed amendments, Mr. Speaker, that in all of this, and we speak of the fishing out, overfishing of our nearshore waters, let us not forget that we also have an opportunity to develop a vibrant aquaculture industry, inland fishing. And we need to do that. In matter of fact, we start it and we starts and stops. But inland fishing, inland aquaculture is a potential area. Freshwater fish is an area that needs to be exploited more. In other areas, Mr. Speaker, in other areas in the Caribbean, they have also cordoned off areas in the sea for commercial production of shrimp and salmon and other things like that. Even in little, what's that country's name? One of our sister countries, Turks and Caicos. In Turks and Caicos, they have models of that we can look at. So it's time for us to think out of the box. Time for us to become creative and for us to lead the way to really developing a dynamic and vibrant fisheries sector. Let this not, Mr. Speaker, just be a change in the law, but let it be a change in our practices so that we can really help and guide the process to creating wealth in the industry. Mr. Speaker, I just want to propose two amendments to the bill. The first one is in clause 28, subsection 3, which we are proposing should be deleted and replaced with a new clause which reads as follows. Subject to the provisions of this Act, the authority shall, if satisfied that an applicant has complied with the requirements of subsection 1, grant the license, authorization, or permit. This obviously is simply placing that responsibility in the hands of the authority that will be established. And in the second amendment, Mr. Speaker, in clause 5, subsection 4J should be deleted and replaced with the following. The granting, suspension, cancellation, and revocation of licenses, authorizations, permits, and the allocation of fishing rights and quotas under this Act or any regulations made under this Act. So these are the two amendments that we propose to the Fisheries Act that is before the Parliament at this time, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank everyone for the role that both governments have played a significant role over the years in the development of this bill. And the immediate outgoing Minister of Agriculture himself was the one to actually put the finishing touches on it before it was final, along with the staff of the ministry and the Attorney General's chambers and so on. And we want to thank everyone for the collective effort in coming to this point today. Thank you very much. I said all the ministers of agriculture. I beg for the second reading of the bill, Mr. Speaker.
The question is that the bill be read a second time. Those in favor? Those in favor? Those against? As of it.
A bill entitled An Act to Repeal the Fishing Industry Act to provide for the efficient and effective management and sustainable development of fisheries, aquaculture, and other related activities in accordance with internationally recognized norms, standards, and best practices, and to provide for matters connected therewith and incidental thereto. Read a second time.
The House will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole House to consider the bill clause by clause. I put part 1, clause 1 to 2. Those in favor? Members? Those against? As of it. I put part 2, clause 3 to 4. Those in favor? Those against? As of it. I put part 3, clause 5 to 11. Those in favor? Those against? As of it.
There's an amendment to that. Sorry. No.
This is amended. Part 5?
Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, on clause 5, subsection 4J, it should be deleted, what's there now, and is substituted with the following: the granting, comma, suspension, comma, cancellation and revocation of licenses, comma, authorizations, comma, permits and the allocation of fishing rights and quotas under this act or any regulations made under this act. Full stop.
I put the amendment. Those in favor?
Aye.
I put clause 5(4) as amended. Those in favor? Those against? As of it. What do you put now? Clause 4. I put clause 4, part 4, clauses 12 to 24. Those in favor? Those against? As of it.
88 clauses, you know, man.
I put clause 5, part 5, clauses 25 to 41. Those in favor? Those against? As of it.
Mr. In clause 28, we have the second amendment that I made reference to. In clause 28, subsection 3 should be deleted, the entire clause deleted, and substituted with the following: subject to the provisions of this act, the authority shall, if satisfied that an applicant has complied with the requirements of subsection 1, grant the license or the authorization or permit.
I put the amendment to clause 28. Those in favor? Those against? As of it. I put clause 28 as amended. Those in favor? Those against? As of it. I put part 6, clauses 42 to 45. Is there an amendment to that?
No,
Those in favor?
I have no more amendments, Mr. Chairman.
Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. I put Part 7, clauses 46, 48. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. I put Part 8, clauses 49 to 55. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. I put Part 9, clauses 56 to 61. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. I put Part 10, clauses 62 to 67. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. I put Part 11, clauses 68 to 69. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. I put Part 12, clause 70. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. I put Part 13, clauses 71 to 78. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. I put Part 14, clauses 79 to 80. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. I put Part 15, clauses 81 to 86. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. I put Part 16, clauses 87 to 102. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. I put Part 17, clause 103. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. I put Part 18, clauses 104 to 108. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. I put Part 19, clauses 109 to 110. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. I put Part 20, clauses 111 to 114. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. I put the first schedule. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. I put the second schedule. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. I put the third schedule. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. I put the fourth schedule. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. I put the fifth schedule. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. I put the title and enacting clause. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. The question is? How many amendments? How many amendments? The question is that I do report the bill as having passed committee stage with 2 amendments. Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. I do report the bill as having passed committee stage with 2 amendments. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move for the 3rd reading of the bill.
Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it.
A bill entitled An Act to Repeal the Fishing Industry Act to provide for efficient and effective management and sustainable development of fisheries, aquaculture, and other related activities.
A bill entitled An Act to Repeal the Fishing Industry Act to provide for the efficient and effective management and sustainable development of fisheries, aquaculture, and other related activities in accordance with internationally recognized norms, standards, and best practices, and to provide for matters connected therewith and incidental thereto, read a third time and passed.
Mr. Speaker, I now invite you to invite the Member of Parliament for Western Westmoreland to make his sectorial presentation. He will be the final speaker.
Dr. McNeil.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I was wondering if I would ever get to speak. I think this is the fourth occasion that I was supposed to speak and being put off. So finally happy to be, yes. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to start by commending you and the clerk and the parliamentary staff for the work that you do for us. I'd also like to commend the leader of the opposition and to thank him for having placed his trust in me to oversee this portfolio. I'd also like, Mr. Speaker, I think all of us in here depend on our families to support us and look out for us. Based on the moving target, 2 members of Parliament have turned up today. My mother, who makes her annual pilgrimage, and of course my son, John. Yes, absolutely. Yes. Young Dr. McNeil, I hear you. Yes. I'd also like to thank my wife, Sheila, who is not able to be here with us today. And long suffering. And of course, I'd like to just congratulate my daughter, Ashley, who last month graduated with her master's in Shanghai. Yes. I'd like to thank my personal staff, Fiona and Polly, for constantly being there to support me. And of course, Mr. Speaker, the great constituency of Western Westmoreland. I want to commend the councillors, led by the Mayor, Councillor Bertel Moore, your friend, and Councillors Miles, James, and Mackenzie. Mr. Speaker, this year is my 21st year as a Member of Parliament for Western Westmoreland and my 5th term in Parliament. But Mr. Speaker, this year has been one of the most difficult years I've had. I've had floods, I've had numerous losses of persons in the constituency, I've had land issues, and of course the issue of crime in Westmoreland has been a pervasive problem which culminated with the tragedy we had last month in Grange Hill. But Mr. Speaker, every now and then out of these things there are positives that happen at the same time. Just this morning, I had a long conversation with the principal of the Broughton Primary School, Marva Clark, because the Broughton Primary School was a winner of the TVJ quiz on tourism, and they were the All-Island champions. So I want to commend them. And also, Mr. Speaker, just to say that we had that tragedy in Grange Hill, but just to say that Grange Hill Primary School had 13 students that had over 95% in the GSAT exams. The Speaker, it was the most students awarded for that in all of Region 4, St. James, Hanford, Westmoreland. Was your primary school, the member from West Central St. James. And only 13 schools in the island had more passes, over 95% in the GSAT. And what I'd like to say, Mr. Speaker, I want to commend Mr. Clayton Smith and the team at Grange Hill Primary. I just want to say, yes, and I just want to say that, you know, on a bittersweet side, one child did not graduate. Nicole Boyne was the one child who was killed on the 1st of May, the start of Child Month, on that incident that happened in Grange Hill. So we need to remember that when we're also looking at the positives that have happened. Mr. Speaker, I now want to turn to my portfolio responsibilities of tourism. Mr. Speaker, we live in a very special country that commands a presence globally far beyond its size, population, and economic fortune. Imagine a country of a mere 4,200 square miles, which has had such a huge impact on the world that we now have one of the most recognizable brands globally. There is definitely a natural Jamaican mystique established by our athletes, food, music, language, and the plain sense of being with which the world identifies, and which makes us truly unique. But above all, we are blessed people. We are blessed with our people. The warm personality of our people, at our best, is the magnet that attracts visitors to Jamaica. So, Mr. Speaker, with our natural, cultural, and human resources, we are ideally suited for tourism. Everybody wants to come to Jamaica. But, Mr. Speaker, to be successful in this lucrative industry, there are a number of other requirements that must be in place. Fortunately, Jamaica has the majority of these. Modern tourism infrastructure, roads, water, airports, a trained workforce, good marketing and airlift, and a first-class tourism product. And with that, I'm speaking about our hotels and our airports. Mr. Speaker, our tourism product has always been world-class. Over the years, we've had outstanding local brands. From the days of Myrtle Bank, Tower Isle, and Frenchman's Cove, to Round Hill Sandals, Super Cubs, and Couples. Many of our properties have gained worldwide acclaim and have become international powerhouses in their own right. So, Mr. Speaker, I say all of this because tourism is an area in which Jamaica has a distinct and competitive advantage. If it performs well and we get it right, it can be the driver of economic growth for Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, we measure tourism's performance by the rise and fall in stopover arrivals. This has increased almost every year for decades, usually between 3 and 7%, due to higher occupancies and minor expansions to existing properties. To achieve greater growth rates, especially double-digit growth, we need to have substantial investment in new room stock. In other words, if you're going to grow by large numbers, you have to have space to put them. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to turn to tourism investments. Mr. Speaker, over the last 20 years, we have had 2 real spurts of investment. From the late 1990s, we had about 6,000 new hotel rooms come on stream. When they came on stream, they brought properties such as the Ritz-Carlton, Rio, Bahia Principe, Secrets, Iberia Star, and Fiesta. This wave ended in 2008. So, Speaker, we then had a lull until 2013, when the second wave began. This wave saw the addition of the Sensatori, the Breathless, Hyatt, Royalton, Moon Palace. So, Speaker, what is envisaged in this wave of investment that was set in place is over 10,000 new hotel rooms. Already, 2,500 of those new rooms have come on stream to date. And if we look at it, 2,500 hotel rooms, if you have 25,000, we have had an expansion of about 10% of our hotel stock in that period over the last 2 years. Mr. Speaker, later this year, we should see the groundbreaking for the Charisma project. This Charisma project should bring over 5,000 new hotel rooms to Jamaica. Sugarcane, the name of the project, will be the single largest investment in tourism Jamaica has ever seen. And I want to give special commendations to the major players in the company who have placed their confidence in Jamaica. And I'm speaking about Ruben, Mandy, Lubo, and Raphael. These are the principals who have put their confidence in Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, yes, I know, Ruben has had problems. Mr. Speaker, in 2013, TUI, the largest tour operator in the world, indicated that they wanted to introduce their premium brand, a brand called Sensatori. They wanted to bring it to Jamaica, and it was going to be the first, this was going to be the second time it was outside of Europe, the only other one being in Cancun. We hosted a dinner at Devon House with the investors, with the TUI persons, and the then chairman of the tourist board, Dennis Morrison, and the then director of tourism, John Lynch. And we discussed the project, and I suggested to them at the time that the best place for a Sensatori would be Negril. And Mr. Speaker, the rest is history. Charisma, the operators were so blown away by the performance that they wanted more. In 2014, we put them in touch with the Shovel Reggie project, which was a project that we were doing with JAMPO in association with Tony Hilton, who was then Minister with Responsibility. They went and looked at the various properties that were around, and after a lot of consultation, they came up with Landovery. Mr. Speaker, at the time when we had that discussion, the investment was so big, that the chairman, Mr. Speaker, the chairman of TUI and the board of directors, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to beg your protection. Yes, thank you. Let us listen. Mr. Speaker, this investment was so big that the chairman of TUI, the largest tour operator in the world, and the board of directors flew down to Jamaica and came and met with us in Negril, and we sat down at the hotel and we talked about it. And they went and looked at the property and looked at the numbers, and at the end of it, they came back to us and told us that this project was a go and that the Charisma project was going to take place. Mr. Speaker, this wave of investment that I'm talking about, this wave of investment that started with the Sensatories and the Moon Palaces, etc., all of these things were only made possible by the work done by our administration. And Mr. Speaker, I'm yet to see any new project brought to the table that was not on the books prior to the last general election. And I want to commend the support that was given to me, in particular, by former Prime Minister Portia Simpson Miller And in particular, Mr. Speaker, I want to pay tribute to the then Minister of Finance and Public Service, Dr. Peter Phillips, for having implemented, Mr. Speaker, for having implemented fundamental policies towards transforming the economy of Jamaica and creating an economic environment which is attractive to investment. Mr. Speaker, I find it ironic that when we announced this project long before the last general election, some of those in this House, and I'm not looking in anywhere direct, in particular, but some of us who currently sit in this House called it an election gimmick. But today, they're more than happy to claim it. Mr. Speaker, if we were in agriculture, some of these people will be charged for pray their last name. Mr. Speaker. Yes. Mr. Speaker, a little later on, I will mention how these projects can best impact Jamaica. But I now want to turn to the performance of Jamaica in terms of visitor arrivals. Mr. Speaker, there's been a lot of trumpet blowing about our visitor arrival performance for the last year. Bell ringing, bell ringing, bell ringing. Over the last year, yes. The Minister and others have attributed the 11.4% increase, or roughly 500,000 additional visitors that came to our shores in 2017, to their marketing skills. A Facebook quote, a Facebook post quoted in a Gleaner article earlier this year suggested that foreign trips undertaken by a frequent flyer in the ministry, and I'm not alluding to you, another frequent flyer, but we're still not certain who, because they were claiming the success, so I wasn't certain who, but anyway. But suggested that these foreign trips resulted in the best performance of Jamaica's tourism sector on record. This was posted. The question I would have to ask is, how did they assist with that great record? It could only be with prayers. Because, Mr. Speaker, it is a well-known fact in the industry that the impact of Hurricane Irma last year on our Caribbean neighbors resulted in the redirecting of over 60 unscheduled cruise ships to Jamaica and accounted for almost 250,000 additional visitors, a 16.6% increase. This means, Mr. Speaker, that half of the increase in arrivals last year was due to external forces outside of our control. Mr. Speaker, diversion of stopover visitors also contributed to the overall increase in visitor arrivals. So, Mr. Speaker, in total, over 2/3 of the increase was unexpected. Over 300,000 of the visitors who came last year arrived on account of the misfortune of our visitors. Our competitors. Mr. Speaker, I'm just, you never had the trouble, right? No, you get it. Take a while, but you got it. Mr. Speaker, to claim that this was due to marketing achievements is just a sleight of hand. Yes. The minister knows the facts as well as I do, and to say otherwise is nothing but a $9 million scam. Yeah. It is nothing but a $9 million scam. Mr. Speaker, this is not the first time that we have had this confluence of events. I would like to remind this honorable House that the last time the stars were so similarly aligned was in 2006, following a wave of new hotel openings in Jamaica and the onslaught of Hurricane Wilma, which almost wiped out Cancun. The increase in stopover arrivals at that time was 13.5%, or 200,000 more stopover visitors. I'm talking stopover over the year before. And that, Mr. Speaker, is still the record. Mr. Speaker, I say all of this because, as I said earlier, I thought it important to show the total arrival figures for Jamaica over the last 5 years. And these come from the Tourist Board statistics. And I just want to say two things. Yes, 6 months. 6 months. Yeah. Year to date. I got it out. I got the figures out of this article. I got it out of this article. Mr. Speaker, I see a full page ad in today's paper.
Oh, really?
I thought it was...
Bringing guests?
I think it's serendipity. They say that an article should come out on the day that I'm speaking. However, just to say, the heading is tourism. Jamaica's tourism is booming. And I just want to point out three things. The new investment in additional rooms. I'm coming. The first thing they say here, that the new investments is excellent in Oyster Bay. And we know that excellence in Oyster Bay has been on the books. They bought the land 15 years ago. 15 years ago. The second thing I would say, Mr. Speaker, there has been a discussion about 5 in 5 in 5. And if we look, you can see over the last 5 years, we have had arrivals of over 5% more than not. But the third thing that I want to say is that the substance of this article, of this full-page ad, tourism, Jamaica's tourism is booming, and it says, and overall the market has grown by 5.4%. 5.4%. And I would just say to you, Mr. Speaker, and a half a year, and I would say to you, Mr. Speaker, that the point we're making is that, yes, tourism is booming as it boomed in 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017, and 2018. There is no change in the arrivals except for what came last year, Mr. Speaker, and that was based on what happened from the movement because of the hurricane. And Mr. Speaker, I just want to say that I needed to clarify the figures because there's a tendency for figures to go all over the place. But just to say that at the end of the day, what we need to ensure is that we keep our standard marketing on track so that we can ensure that we have consistent arrivals year on year. All right, so Mr. Speaker, I now want to move to the next section. And I want to call this section, Mr. Speaker, Continue the Progress. The Prime Minister spoke about continue the progress. And I just want to say that there were a number of programs that we put in place when we were in the last time. And I just want to mention some of the programs because I believe they're important programs and I feel that we need to look at them and see what we can do with them. The first that I want to mention is the beaches program. So, Speaker, there's been a lot of talk about Jamaica's beaches recently. The beaches program was a program that we put in place to ensure that we got those remaining beaches in Jamaica that are now there, that we could take those beaches, secure them, get the titles, and leave them so that we would have use of them for our people for years to come. This program was to ensure that those beaches were done. They were to be free of charge to Jamaicans. They were to be in perpetuity, and we were going to put the best facilities into them.
Very good.
Mr. Speaker, it's a program around which we should all agree. We left $200 million in place at the Tourism Enhancement Fund for the first phase of the beaches program. We had selected 20 beaches and had completed 3 of them when we left office. Why is it that not one additional beach has been completed over the last 2 years? Has the program been abandoned? This is unacceptable. I want to urge the minister to continue with this worthwhile program in the interest of the Jamaican people. You like the picture before? Mr. Speaker, I now want to turn. I now want to turn, Mr. Speaker, to the linkages program. Mr. Speaker, the linkages program was set up to deepen the connection between the tourism sector and other sectors of the economy. I believe that this is one of the most impactful programs that I initiated during my tenure, and the program that has the greatest opportunity for social revolution of the tourism industry. Mr. Speaker, the objective of the Linkages Hub was to encourage our partners in the sector to buy more locally, so that when the farmer, the manufacturer, the craft trader, the agro-processor, up to the pillar maker, the dressmaker, could all benefit from the opportunities that 30,000 hotel rooms would provide. The ultimate objective is for us to retain more from the tourism dollar. This is why I believe that this will make the difference. That is why in 2014 and 15, I hosted meetings with senior representatives from all the hotels and attractions in the sector, put them in touch with our businessmen, manufacturers, and the other sectors. We had the first of these meetings at the Terra Nova in Kingston. Other initiatives continued that culminated with, for the first time, the JTB becoming a major partner with the GMA at Expo. We also had mass meetings with the farmers. We picked Mandeville as a center, and we presented them with the demand study, which was a study that we did to look at everything that was consumed in the tourism sector, and so that our farmers and RADA could better plan how they would do the things. And we also did the farmers markets in the resort areas. Mr. Speaker, the Linkages Hub as an initiative cannot and will not succeed if the Minister and Minister of Tourism do not put their collective weight behind the program. I know now that you're putting more.
Why, Ed?
We have to forcefully encourage our partners to log on to this program. It is unacceptable for the GMA to be begging the minister to intercede on their behalf, and he telling them that he cannot tell investors who they must do business with. This is not the point of linkages. Our partners are willing and able to be brought to the table. It suits them to have a positive impact on Jamaica. But somebody has to open that door, and that somebody has to be the Minister of Tourism. Mr. Speaker, I earlier stated that we have a number of new investments coming on stream. Charisma, China Harbour, etc. If the minister does not engage each and every one of these new investments and bring them to the table even before they break ground, introduce them to our local manufacturers, our suppliers, introduce them to our local professionals, architects, surveyors, contractors, everyone, he would have failed, and all our dreams of tourism being the driver of economic growth will come to naught. Mr. Speaker, the last one I want to mention is the craft and small industries.
Yeah.
The craft sector is a very important part of our industry and employs thousands of Jamaicans. Right now, there's grave discontent in the industry. I had set up a craft council comprising the leadership of the craft markets and other members of the sector so that participants in this industry, both artisans and traders alike, would have a say in the development of the sector. They'd have a say in how the markets would be developed. They'd have a say in the operations of the industry. They'd have a say in marketing of their products, both locally and overseas. This council has been disbanded. The minister speaks regularly of building artisans' villages. And with due respect, Mr. Minister, we were talking about that even in the last administration. Ironically, the designs for the Negril craft market, and I notice you're coming to Negril on Friday, and I'll try and be there with you, were far advanced and ready for procurement. This project seems to be put on hold. I suspect we will hear more in the following week, yes. But I'm calling on the minister to reconvene the council, the craft market council, and to pay some real attention to this important sector that currently feels that it is languishing. Mr. Speaker, I now want to turn to what I see as a way forward. One of the things that we need to do is to imagine the Jamaica that we want to see in the years to come. The Jamaica of 2020, 2025, and 2030. I believe that most Jamaicans, when they think of what they would like, they see an industry that has Jamaicans at all levels, including the very top. They want to see an industry fully integrated with the rest of the country so that the economy can thrive. And they want to see an industry that the average Jamaican feels that he can and should be a part of. So, Speaker, a large part of the positives, a large part of the positive that Jamaica now derives from tourism comes from the employment opportunities created within the sector. And therefore, we need to ensure that looking to this future, we ensure that we maximize the employment benefits for workers at all levels. So I want to make some suggestions, and a number of these suggestions have been made by my colleagues, both I know the member with responsibility for foreign affairs and the member from Labour. So, Speaker, the first thing is, Mr. Speaker, we want employment opportunities for Jamaica.
Members' time for speaking has expired. House Leader.
You know, Mr. Speaker, the member is going quite well. It's an amazing thing, though. It reminds me that so many people wish to pick up eggs and don't raise fowl. But nonetheless, we will extend the member's time for speaking sufficient to allow him to complete his presentation.
Those in favor? Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, the first thing is that we want, Mr. Speaker, the first thing is that we want employment opportunities in tourism for Jamaicans at all levels, especially the very top. There's no doubt in my mind about the capacity of our Jamaican managers. After all, as I have said before, we have international brands that have gone toe-to-toe with the best in the world under the leadership of Jamaican managers. Just look at Sandals, our super clubs, Couples, Sagicor. These were all built using Jamaican managers throughout their entire structure. So why can't this happen going forward? So, Speaker, these changes may not require legislation. It may only take forceful negotiation with our partners. In other words, it may not require imposition, but negotiation. Inevitably, in this type of sector, foreign workers will be brought into any international industry. but we have to work towards integrating more Jamaicans at the top level of our industry. And Mr. Speaker, where foreign workers are brought in, the opportunity should be provided for an equal number of Jamaican nationals to be sent to the subsidiaries in other countries. This practice is not new to other industries in Jamaica. The second thing, Mr. Speaker, is something very dear to my heart, the pensions. Mr. Speaker, there is no doubt that the workers in our sector deserve to have long-term security in their golden years, after so ably contributing and building our tourism sector. To this end, Mr. Speaker, it is essential to complete the process that I initiated for a contributory pension scheme. Mr. Speaker, the scheme was scheduled to be implemented in January of 2017. Until now, it has not been put into place. The Minister has given 2 missed deadlines already. This is unacceptable and shows a disregard for the workers and a lack of commitment to this program. Mr. Speaker, for the record, work previously done on this. Mr. Speaker, for the record, work previously done on pensions in the sector before our administration was for an individual pension scheme, which was never going to work, Mr. Speaker. It was simply for an individual scheme. But, Mr. Speaker, so many of our employees fall below the tax threshold that they didn't see any benefit to them for joining. So you had a problem where you were going around and saying to people, join the pension. But when they looked at it, they were below the threshold and they weren't getting the benefit, so it wasn't working.
There's no contract.
Mr. Speaker, the fundamental change that I made was to go and to meet with the JHTA, the Jamaica Hotel and Tourist Association, early in my tenure, and negotiate with them and agree to the setting up of a contributory pension scheme, a scheme where both the employee and the employer would contribute. That is what will make the difference. This will bring real benefits to the workers. And Mr. Speaker, an agreement was signed in 2015 between ourselves that we would move forward on this program. Mr. Speaker, the Minister gave us a deadline to complete the program for last December, and again one for June. June is now finished. Mr. Speaker, I plead with the Minister. This program is very important. We need to get on with it. The tourism workers need the program implemented now. Mr. Speaker. All right, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to now turn to contract workers, which I know is something that our spokesperson, my colleague in Spokesman and Labour, spoke about. And I want to just add to him. I want to say, Mr. Speaker, we have to put an end to the wholesale use of contract hiring in the industry. Mr. Speaker, there are some situations that the contract system is suited for, but it was never intended as a tool to deprive the workers of the benefits of permanent employment.
Yeah.
Under the omnibus tax policy, which we had put in place by the former Minister of Finance, we attempted to use employee credits to resolve this problem. But this was not sufficient to deter the practice. We on this side are committed to ending it. However, we are committed to ending it. And we understand that this must be taken in a wider review of the labor laws. Mr. Speaker, the third thing that I want to touch on has to do with equal pay for Jamaican nationals. Mr. Speaker, we must have equal pay for Jamaican nationals. One of the things that we on this side, are most proud of is the social change policies of the 1970s. One of these was equal pay for women. Today, 40 years later, you still have Jamaican workers in the sector doing the same jobs as their foreign counterpart and purportedly earning a fraction of the salary. This situation cannot be allowed to continue. So, Mr. Speaker, many of our Caribbean colleagues have already taken steps to ensure equity in the industry. So we too must ensure that we put policies in place to protect our workers and to ensure the employment benefits of tourism reach the people of Jamaica. And I think that there's a lot of ground for us to work together on that. Mr. Speaker, I now want to move from the employment element of it to the wider economy of tourism. Mr. Speaker, there are real changes taking place in the international tourism industry as we speak. International businesses are consolidating into larger conglomerates which are vertically integrated. This means that these companies own all aspects of the tourism experience, from the travel agency to the plane, to the bus, to the hotel, even the attractions, they own everything. Mr. Speaker, as this trend continues, it leaves very little space for the local entrepreneur. It leaves little space, yes. Mr. Speaker, we need to carve out a space. Mr. Speaker, we need to carve out a space for Jamaicans in tourism, and I want to suggest a few areas. I've already mentioned craft and some of the things we need to do. I want to add transportation, entertainment, and construction. Mr. Speaker, these industries, all 3 or 4 of them, take thousands of Jamaican workers. And what we have to do is ensure that we put in place the policies to protect them in this globalized economy. There's been a lot of discussions about the entertainment sector recently. Mr. Speaker, Jamaica is renowned for its music. Bob Marley is one of our music icons. The minister from Clarendon, the member from Clarendon did a good rendition of One Love. No woman's no cry. Yes. Right? Mr. Speaker, our music is one of those things that we are known for. And it is our culture that the people come from. Mr. Speaker, there needs to be a review. Mr. Speaker, there needs to be a review at the Ministry of Labour of the weaknesses in the system that allows rank and file foreign entertainers to populate the industry to the detriment of local entertainment talent. Mr. Speaker, we have to find a way to ensure that Jamaican entrepreneurs and entertainers, and I mean, I don't know if many of you remember, they used to have a man in the early days called Miko Blanco. Carl would know Miko Blanco. Right? Mr. Speaker, these people played a fundamental role in building our industry, and we have to protect the Miko Blancos of today. We have to protect the entertainers in our sector. Mr. Speaker, as I said before, the transportation, craft sector, construction are areas from which thousands of Jamaicans make their living. Policies must be put in place to not only protect these sectors, but also, Mr. Speaker, to incentivize them to ensure that their success as they inevitably go up against the creeping forces of globalization. Mr. Speaker, these discussions began during my time as minister, and they must continue and the appropriate safeguards quickly put in place. Local companies of all sizes must be strengthened, especially as many new companies coming to Jamaica can move into this space, crowd them out. Many of our neighboring islands already have protections in place for this sector, and so must we. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to the last part of my presentation, and it is something that I feel that needs to be brought out. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, tourism has always been a sector around which the entire country can unite. It has always been a sector around which the entire country can unite. We have always found common cause. But, Mr. Speaker, something is happening now that runs counter to that and threatens the established practice. Mr. Speaker, I'm speaking about the seeming infiltration of the Ministry of Tourism and its agencies by political activists, distinct from the usual practice of professionals and stakeholders that would normally come from the sector. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, in the Tourism Product Development Company, TPDCO alone, over the last 18 months, we have seen the hiring of 4 active executive members of the governing Jamaica Labour Parliament affiliate G2K. They are now employed to management positions at TPDCO. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, these include the President of G2K, a Vice President of G2K, the General Secretary of G2K, and the Legal Advisor of G2K, all 4 of them in one agency in the Ministry of Tourism. All 4 in one agency.
Which candidate is that 28? Which candidate is that?
Minister Warmington has asked me to repeat it. He has asked me to repeat it.
How much candidate
in TPDCO over the last 18 months, the President of G2K, a Vice President, the General Secretary, and a legal advisor have been hired. Mr. Speaker, there are others, including members from the area council, members of the campaign teams, but I am containing myself today to focus only on officers of the party. Mr. Speaker, this insidious situation opens up a number of questions. Were other professionals who applied excluded to make way for them? Of course. What happened to the professionals who were there before? And thirdly, Mr. Speaker, anyone getting employment should be given due consideration in spite of political affiliation, class, or religion. It must be fair for all. Jobs for the boys. As it currently stands with so many activists in one agency, I remember 4 officers in one agency, it seems like a deliberate political plan and calls into question issues of collusion. Mr. Speaker, some person have asked if this is really just like a little prosperity for a few. Yeah, that's what. But the truth of the matter is, for the boys, it is not right. Mr. Speaker, I hear what is being said, and I'm going to make a statement. Mr. Speaker, for the record, this has never happened before in the Ministry of Tourism, and I reject any assertion to the contrary. I reject any assertion to the contrary. I go further. I have never seen this happen in either administration on either side. And Mr. Speaker, I'm going to tell you why. I'm going to tell you why this is a problem. I'm going to tell you why this is a problem. Big problem. It's troubling, Mr. Speaker, for 2 reasons. It's troubling for 2 reasons. The first, Mr. Speaker, there are projects that have been selected over the last year by the ministry that have nothing to do with tourism. and seem to have been decided in a narrow political light rather than in the national interest.
What?
You know, because you know of at least one. You know of at least one. So, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, this undermines and erodes the partnership and trust we have developed over the years in the industry. I seem to have opened up a firestorm. I seem to have opened up a little firestorm.
Address the speaker.
I would if I could hear the speaker.
Kindly address the speaker.
Would you please address your members?
Go ahead, member.
Can't hear. So, Mr. Speaker, the first point I made is that there are some projects that have taken on a political taint in their selection. The second thing, Mr. Speaker, TPDCO, in developing the product, has to work with all members of parliament. You have to work with all members of parliament. So how does a member of parliament, I'm going to single out one, North Trelawney, how does a member from North Trelawney have consultations with the TPDCO representative, knowing that he or she may be the representative in the next election? Public servants? It's self-evident.
It's self-evident.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, these things are wrong. Mr. Speaker, is it true that some of these people hired are just biding their time till the next general elections? Mr. Speaker, one of the strengths of our Westminster system is that despite the changes in political administration, there's a continuity of government. This is one of the things that distinguishes us from failed states.
Order, please. Order, please.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Some order on that, sir.
Dr. McNeil, go ahead.
No, I can't hear. Mr. Speaker, one of the strengths of the Westminster system is that despite changes in political administration, there's continuity of government. This is one of the things that distinguishes us from failed states. The practice of political victimization is sapping our energies. It divides our people. It continues to fertilize the persistence of poverty in our country. And most of all, it deprives our people of the hope they so desperately need. Mr. Speaker, we in Parliament, we are all here because we want a better Jamaica. Mr. Speaker.
Talking in the mic. Talking in the mic.
I seem to have thrown a little. Mr. Speaker.
Order, please.
Mr. Speaker, we are all in Parliament because we want a better Jamaica. This means, Mr. Speaker, that we should be supportive of good governance, openness, and transparency. If these things are happening, the people of Jamaica must know. The time may have come to select which posts in government will be political appointments and which will not, and also to review the governance structure of public bodies. But one thing I'm certain of, Mr. Speaker, is that tourism is not an area that should be politicized, and I'm calling on the government to stop it. They must stop it. The politicization of our national institutions will take this country down a dark and dangerous path. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to the closing. I now turn to the closing. In closing, Mr. Speaker,
Stop it now.
in closing, Mr. Speaker, we them up though. All right. In closing, Mr. Speaker, as I have said today, tourism is one of those sectors where Jamaica has all the ingredients to be successful. A good platform has been laid over generations, and the stage has been set for continued success going forward. This sector has the potential to be a major driver of positive socio-economic change for Jamaica. Our job, Mr. Speaker, is to put in place policy initiatives to transform this potential into a reality so that we can realize our Jamaican dream. To this end, Mr. Speaker, let us ensure continuity of those positive programs left in place, such as the beaches and linkages programs that are so important to us all. Let us ensure that our tourism workers enjoy permanent jobs with equal pay, and that they occupy the commanding heights of the sector, and that when they retire, they are guaranteed a decent pension on which to survive. Let us ensure that legislation is in place to carve out proper economic space for entrepreneurs, not just in ownership, but also in entertainment, construction, craft, and transportation subsectors of the industry. And above all, let us ensure, Mr. Speaker, that all we do is in the interest of the people of Jamaica, and that we do nothing to jeopardize tourism remaining a uniting force in our society. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleagues for their indulgence.
House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, as indicated, one thing I can say, Mr. Speaker, is that Parliament is getting very fashionable. I consider dress, both male and female, to be fashionable. How do you know I was not referring to the leader of opposition business? Oh, and you're quite right. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Industry, Commerce, Agriculture and Fisheries will now proceed to close the sectoral debate. So I call on him to close the debate. I ask you to invite him to close the debate, after which I'm quite certain that we will hear from the Prime Minister in his statement.
Mr. Shaw.
That's enough.
Mr. Speaker, my task today and honor is to close the sectoral debate. Having opened and closed the budget debate. I think I think we will agree that the presentations and the discussions have been robust and that the Jamaican democracy is alive and well. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the government, I wish to thank all of my colleagues for their contributions to this year's debate. It is important that we recall and highlight some of the critical issues that were discussed. Mr. Speaker, it is important to note that while we address the state of our nation in Jamaica, we also experience a changing world environment as adjustments to the trade relations between members of the group of 7 industrialized nations were initiated. We note also the burgeoning shifts in geopolitical relations, especially with focus on the Korean Peninsula, and continue to monitor the implications for trade and the global community. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, we also note the honor paid to Jamaica through our Prime Minister, who was invited as a special guest to the G7 summit in Canada last month, and the invitation to the upcoming G20 summit that will be held in Argentina. Nearer home, Jamaica is pleased to have hosted the 39th CARICOM Heads of Government Conference here in Montego Bay last week, with our most honorable Prime Minister resuming chairmanship of CARICOM at the same time. And we congratulate him in this regard on hosting an excellent conference. Of course, Mr. Speaker, of note are the measures posited by the heads of government of the region to put measures in place to fast-track the full implementation of the CARICOM single market. These measures including the special meeting of CARICOM heads to focus solely on the CSME, and which is to be convened in Trinidad and Tobago in November this year. The quarterly meetings of the Prime Ministerial Subcommittee on the CSME to give urgency to the implementation process. Slated to begin in September in Barbados, among others, will undoubtedly lead to the strengthening of our regional partnerships, strategic frameworks, and the utilization of the potential of the CARICOM market as collectively we move toward advancing the region. Mr. Speaker, having regard to this level of engagement by the Prime Minister and the visionary initiative to seek to jumpstart the stalled regional integration process, I think this can hardly be characterized as a doctrine of doing nothing, as posited by the opposition spokesman on foreign affairs and foreign trade. Mr. Speaker, in CARICOM, we are family, and among family, we must be honest and fair, and so we must use this opportunity to scrupulously examine our regional relations, our trade relations, and also to review the Treaty of Chaguaramas, especially with respect to the CSME. Mr. Speaker, free trade is a critical issue as we move towards securing greater prosperity for our people. The creation of employment opportunities and the increased production of goods and services in all sectors of the economy, we must focus on increased export earnings and import substitution. The time has come for us to recognize and utilize the potential of the CARICOM market in order to achieve this. Mr. Speaker, it's not by chance that most, if not all, of the presentations in this sectoral debate have recognized and addressed the criticality of Jamaica's commitment to the furtherance of the growth agenda and our national vision for a better country. Having achieved the mandate of putting the economy on the right track, we recognize that we must now grow the economy through production. This, Mr. Speaker, is the greatest imperative now facing Jamaica. And as we grow the economy, we appreciate that we must also pay the requisite attention to the social issues relating to health, education, social security, as well as national security and justice. Indeed, the opposition spokesman on industry and commerce is correct in citing the words of Dambisa Moyo, which state that people are demanding their governments do more to improve their lives faster, something which policymakers are unable to deliver under conditions of anemic growth. Mr. Speaker, our job as policymakers is not an easy one, but one that demands that through our policies and laws we enable growth and development to improve people's lives and help them to achieve prosperity. Before I treat with the major issues raised by various speakers in the debate, I am sure you'll forgive me if I begin with treating, first of all, with the portfolio areas under my responsibility. Mr. Speaker, in my presentation, I laid out an entire strategy to re-engage our vast acreages of lands formerly in sugar, now lying idle. Since that presentation, I have now received a report that shows that some 16,600 hectares of land are now being returned to the government by Pan-Caribbean Sugar Company. Of this, 8,283 hectares are now in active sugarcane production, and it's active but not fulsome. In fact, the fulsome figure is much lower than the 8,000 hectares, which makes potentially 8,359 hectares from that lot of land available for other agricultural activities, including 4,300 hectares which are marginal and in need of rehabilitation. Already, the Sugar Company Holdings is processing several requests, Mr. Speaker, for land by interested investors. In all of this, we will give preference to investments embracing the mother farm, satellite farm concept, and our preferred mode of investment is leasehold rather than sale. Mr. Speaker, under our watch, every square inch of these lands must be productively engaged. Mr. Speaker, one of the crops, indeed the industry that we are focused on, is the cannabis industry. Setting up the Cannabis Licensing Authority was necessary but not sufficient. Given the extraordinary size of this industry and its amazing pace of growth worldwide, we frankly need an all-of-government approach to set the framework to get this industry going and going fast. We are not short of people who want to invest. What we have not done, however, is to establish a clear regulatory framework to facilitate these investments. And in this regard, I have been working with my colleague, Minister of Health, in whose ministry a medicinal cannabis unit has now been established. Together, we have also established a working group to map the entire process and clarify regulatory responsibilities and fix all the issues of overlapping jurisdiction. We expect to get an active plan by the end of this month, and at the same time, we have to apply some of these idle lands to this industry. And we cannot rule out of this the production of industrial hemp. Truth is, Mr. Speaker, what is happening right now is so fast moving. Two companies in Canada alone, one I met last week in Jamaica, Canopy, is now 10 billion Canadian dollars on the Canadian Stock Exchange. Another one that I visited in Toronto, MedRelief and Aurora merged together, $8 billion on the Canadian Stock Exchange. And now, despite the protestations of the American government concerning the movement of money related to marijuana across state borders and across countries, cannabis companies are now being established on the New York Stock Exchange. What has happened in the past couple of weeks? The Food and Drug Administration has approved their first cannabis drug to treat with epilepsy, juvenile epilepsy, epileptic conditions. And so the whole scenario is changing very fast. President Trump has publicly indicated that it is time to review the issue of medical cannabis. So once these things are happening, you can tell that the thing is going to be on a fast track, and we have to be careful that we are not left behind. Mr. Speaker, in terms of sugar, there's no going around it. Sugar will not engage the kind of acreages it did in the past. Even with utilizing the full capacity of the Monimos factory, we would only need about 7,000 hectares. The sugar industry is at a crossroads. Pan-Caribbean has given notice that it will not operate Monimos next year. We in the government are acutely aware of the huge investments made by cane farmers in this industry. Since the establishment of the Cane Expansion Fund unit in December of 2014, approximately $519 million has been approved on lending to farmers in the Monimos factory area. Of this amount, $493 million has been disbursed to 93 farmers for cultivation of 405 hectares. There is no way that this government could sit idly by and allow this investment to be squandered with the closure of the factory. We are therefore working with Pan-Caribbean to facilitate joint ventures with new investors or an outright sale of the factory. We are aware that these initiatives might not materialize for the next crop, therefore, however. The government will put in place measures to ensure that the cane farmers in that area are processed by Appleton and Worthy Park. These discussions are being held and they are favorable to it because they have the capacity for the production. Cane farmers can therefore employ the necessary agronomic measures to secure the crop. Start planting now because we are going to ensure that the crop is reaped next year. At the same time, there is an inventory of some 30,000 tons of locally produced brown sugar that is not being absorbed right now by the local market. This is a development of recent vintage and points to the possible undermining of local brown sugar sales by duty-free imported refined sugar that ostensibly is coming in for local manufacturing, but quite a bit of it is finding its way into the commercial trade and is undermining the sales of locally produced sugar. That's correct. Yes. I know that this issue evokes considerable emotion, but I am determined to fix the regime for the importation of refined sugar so that locally produced sugar is not undermined. This is a critical point, Mr. Speaker. I also announced in the opening my intention to establish a 5 million fruit tree planting project. I have since met with the Food and Agriculture Organization Director General at the 159th session of the FAO Council in Rome, and he has committed the support of the FAO to assist Jamaica in applying for a grant from the Green Climate Fund to finance a reforestation program in Jamaica, as well as an irrigation expansion program as critical components of our climate change adaptation strategy. And I want to indicate that the program with the FAO, which will be supported by the Green Climate Fund, which is based in Korea, and which incidentally, a former Attorney General of Jamaica is now working with the fund in Korea. And that we are working on this plan and we'll be working in close collaboration with the forestry department. So it's not just the fruit tree planting program, but the reforestation. Too many of our hillsides have been denuded, and we need to do a serious reforestation program. I am pleased to announce that only last week the consultants from the FAO were here to commence the preparation of that project. Similarly, as I announced, another set of FAO consultants have started working on the 10-year agricultural plan for Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, we remain, as I said in the closing debate on the Fisheries Act, we remain determined to exploit our endowment in the seas for the prosperity of this nation. Jamaica, like many developing countries, must look beyond our shores in order to leverage the vast potential for economic growth and sustainable development. Now is the time to act in order to position ourselves properly to realize the benefits for sustainable development from the coming blue revolution. In this regard, I am happy that this House has since advanced the debate on the Fisheries Bill, and as I said, which has been closed today, and is a key framework for unlocking the full potential of the blue economy. In terms of the Jamaica Agricultural Commodities Regulatory Authority, Mr. Speaker, I note with interest comments on this authority by the opposition spokesman on agriculture. It bears repeating, Mr. Speaker, that JACRA as a concept was born in the previous GLP administration of 07 to 11 and has had the support of every administration since then. The intent of the legislation is to remove the government from the commercial aspects of the coffee, cocoa, coconut, and spices industries, and to set up a regulatory regime conducive to the rapid development of these crops, which still have enormous potential. While we concede that the legislation is not perfect, we have to hold firm to those provisions that seek to protect local production. It is inexplicable, for instance, that high mountain coffee production is only 5% today of what it was 20 years ago. 20,000 boxes being reaped now compared with 400,000 boxes 20 years ago. Blue Mountain coffee, by the way, we reaped 500,000 boxes 20 years ago. We're reaping 240,000 boxes now. Less, and I'm told by the member that it's probably less. I have ordered a comprehensive review, Mr. Speaker, based on concerns with the JACRA legislation. And the review has been completed, and I'll have that report by the end of the week. And thereafter, I shall report to the nation what aspects of the legislation might have to be altered. But we are taking a careful look at it. In terms of our linkages to tourism, which has been discussed even by the opposition spokesman on tourism, I further note the opposition's reference to the linkages between agriculture and tourism. The imperative for this linkage is impatient of debate, and we have established the Tourism Linkages Committee and under the chairmanship, incidentally, of a private sector person from the industry. And I have thrown myself into this endeavor along with the Minister of Tourism and the Linkages Council. One of the ways of strengthening this linkage is the very mother farm satellite concept I spoke of earlier. However, Mr. Speaker, we might have to consider tying the incentives received by the local hotel sector to their willingness to engage local players. Mr. Speaker, we remain bullish about the agricultural sector and its potential to drive economic growth and job creation. In the first quarter of the sector, the sector grew by 0.5%, driven by a 2.1% increase in the domestic food crops subsector. And I am advised that the preliminary estimate for growth in the domestic food crops subsector for the second quarter is over 5% in the second quarter. Mr. Speaker, we continue to recognize the critical and strategic role of the MSME sector in growth and development. We further recognize that this sector needs all the support from government in order to realize its potential. It is within this context that I am proud to have tabled last week in the Honourable House the updated MSME and entrepreneurship policy and implementation plan. I agree with the opposition spokesman on industry and commerce, who has, of course, I mentioned that before. The manufacturing strategy that I spoke to has now been completed, and I'll be taking the same to Cabinet within this month. I've also re-engaged the manufacturing sector, and we are actively pursuing the provision of factory space in Kingston with the Factories Corporation of Jamaica. In this regard, I have engaged the Most Honourable Prime Minister in relation to handing over, the possibility of handing over the AMC complex to the Factories Corporation of Jamaica with a view to rehabilitating that facility for the use of small exporters and processors. One of the things that came out of Expo 2018 and the JCBC exhibition is a large number of entrepreneurs who are developing processed products out of Jamaican produce, exotic sauces, spices, jams and jellies, wines, all kinds of things, which I've even suggested doesn't have to compete with traditional wines. It can be a whole new market called cooking wines among the things that can be targeted. And pardon me? Absolutely, except the difference is the model that we propose. Government does not have to provide those services. Those services can be provided by the private sector. That is correct. And that facility at Firestone Road, which is literally a few yards away from the port, right, should be turned into a modern agro-processing center, export center to process and export what we grow. So, Mr. Speaker, the opposition spokesman on industry and commerce spoke to the need to have broader, more inclusive growth with jobs take place. We agree, and that is why we speak of engaging our idle lands. That is why we are supporting MSMEs. That's why we are tying small farmers to larger farms where it is possible, and that will give them the guarantee of market for what they produce. That is why, since this, and has to be part of the answer, by the way, to supplying the tourism industry, as well as targeting markets in the CARICOM region. And that is why, since this debate opened, we have tabled the regulations that make special and differential treatment to our MSMEs in respect of government procurement. All of this will ensure that the growth is inclusive and the small man is not left behind. Mr. Speaker, let me now turn my attention to the major programs of the government as announced by my colleague ministers in this debate. All in all, the whole of government is oriented to the imperative of economic growth and job creation, creating a safe environment for our citizens and ensuring that our human capital is developed and our people are healthy. In that regard, Mr. Speaker, we note and highlight the announcements by the Minister of Labour and Social Security regarding the welcome increase in the national minimum wage. The 13% increase in the minimum wage, the $8.4 billion allocation for the PATH program, and the prioritization of the Occupational Safety and Health Act are all among the steps being taken to improve the lives of workers and vulnerable families, even as we seek to improve the social and economic conditions of our workers and their families through job creation initiatives. It goes without saying that an educated and well-trained workforce is critical to the growth and advancement of our society. Our people, and especially our young people, must be equipped with the requisite skills, not only to gain employment in the various economic sectors, but also to be creators of job opportunities for themselves and for others through entrepreneurial enterprise. We note and welcome the decline in the unemployment rate, which now stands at a record low of 9.6%. We continue, however, to be concerned about the approximately 24% youth unemployment rate, and are mindful that this poses a contributory threat to social stability and the reduction of criminal activity. Against this background, we note the plans and programs of the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information to equip our children and young people to achieve the Jamaican dream for social mobility and personal economic independence through self-actualization. The emphasis being placed, among other things, improving early childhood education, very key, enhancing special education programs, introducing the PEP program and unleashing the new Heart Trust NTA, as well as the HOPE program that has been launched by the Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the merger of the Heart Trust NTA with the National Youth Service, the Apprenticeship Board, and the Jamaica Foundation for Lifelong Learning is designed and destined to achieve youth engagement and empowerment, workforce training and certification, adult literacy and numeracy, and for fulfilling careers and national service. This merger is facilitating a broad range of opportunities for the development of Jamaica's human capital by providing training to meet labor market demands. This, Mr. Speaker, is a necessary step towards enabling our human resources to participate in wealth creation. This is what we mean by enabling growth to improve lives. The HOPE program launched by the PM is intended to address productively engaging our unattached youth who may not yet have achieved the matriculation required for the formal education system. We are ensuring through this program that no one is left behind. Mr. Speaker, it's not good enough to talk about the number of unattached youth that are out there without having a plan and a program to target them. A popular song by a prominent recording artist reminds us that a fit we have a fit. And indeed, our vision, where is Mr. Fit? He's not here now. And indeed, our vision for Jamaica is that we have a healthy and stable population as enunciated in Vision 2030. As government continues to acknowledge the long-standing weaknesses and address the upgrading of physical infrastructure in our healthcare services, we wish also to reinforce the paradigm shift being led by the Ministry of Health to address healthcare. In this regard, greater emphasis is being placed on prevention with the promotion of healthy lifestyles to redress the challenges of obesity and non-communicable diseases. And I wish, Mr. Speaker, to use the privilege of this closing address to endorse and to encourage you, my colleagues in this honorable House, and indeed the rest of Jamaica, to embrace the positive messages being disseminated through the Jamaica Moves campaign. And Mr. Speaker, as Minister with responsibility for these various areas, I wish also to say to my colleague Minister that my ministry stands ready to strengthen the necessary collaborative links between our ministries in furthering our goals for food and nutrition and food safety. Mr. Speaker, I believe our current discussions around the cannabis industry clearly remind us that Jamaica is a land of laws. We have to abide by laws. Our history as a people who also clearly documents our relentless struggle for peace and for justice. In this regard, we note the capacity building undertakings of the Ministry of Justice to enhance and modernize both the physical and human resources in order to maximize the administration of justice, balance the rights and responsibilities of our citizens, and to accelerate government's legislative agenda to facilitate the primary role of creating the enabling policy, legislative, institutional, and regulatory environment to facilitate investment, growth, and sustainable development. Another of our popular entertainers reminds us that equal rights and justice require peace. The lack of peace in our nation, manifested through intolerable rates of crime and violence, is the most acute binding constraint to the growth and development of Jamaica. No effort can be spared to defeat the monster named crime. This administration recognizes that, and so a multi-pronged approach is being implemented to restore public order and safety and secure the nation. The Honourable Minister of National Security, in his presentation, outlined a comprehensive approach to national security, which is focused on public order and law enforcement, strong anti-gang strategies, anti-corruption measures, targeted social intervention initiatives in volatile communities, and transformation of the police force into a modern service. Mr. Speaker, as we continue to chart the way forward for growth and development, I wish to reiterate government's primary role, which is to create the enabling policy, legislative, institutional, and regulatory environment. In addition, government must provide the public goods necessary to facilitate the required growth. Infrastructure development in this context, climate adaptation strategies, adequate energy policy and solutions, as well as the application of science and technology are critical issues.
Members' time for speaking has expired. House Leader.
15, no more.
15 minutes.
10 minutes. 10 minutes is good.
Yeah, I think, Mr. Speaker, I ask that you allow the member to another 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Sufficient to enable him to complete his presentation.
Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. Minister Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and so we note it is that Prime Minister himself, who recently highlighted the country's plan of action in updating and modernizing its physical infrastructure. This is particularly evident in the several major road improvement projects now underway. Billions of dollars of road infrastructure works are now in train through the major infrastructure development program. The road improvement projects also extend, Mr. Speaker, to our farm roads, where a whopping $800 million has been allocated for improvement projects in our 2018-19 budget. Some $200 million is being invested in renewable energy programs as the country stays on course to achieving 30% of its energy consumption from renewables by 2030. Of extreme significance, Mr. Speaker, is our resolve to speedily enact a new building code aimed at reducing the vulnerability of the country's built environment and protect lives and livelihoods. Enacting the new building code is imperative to ensure public safety and welfare, minimize damage caused by natural and man-made hazards, as well as to prevent squatter settlements and promote sustainable development. In the productive sector, as I indicated earlier, the country has achieved an unprecedented level of decline in its unemployment rate. What that means, conversely, is that the unemployment rate has increased, and this as a consequence of the provision of jobs through investment and development in business process outsourcing, tourism and hospitality, services generally, mining and construction, and civil development. Sustainable growth, job and wealth creation must, however, Mr. Speaker, be rooted and grounded in the productive sectors of the economy, in agriculture, manufacturing, industry, and the distributive trade. There is almost what I'd call an umbilical correlation between agricultural growth and growth in the general economy. And so if we are really going to make Jamaica move, if we are going to energize the anemic growth we have been experiencing over the last couple of decades, we have to put the productive sector on a more sustainable footing. There are lots of, it's a time for creativity. We have to be creative now. I said at a seminar on agriculture held at the Iberia Star Hotel this morning. I spoke there, and I mentioned to them that no, the farmers were gathered there, and I visited the manufacturer of irrigation systems in Manchester. And unfortunately, he was to advise me that the majority of what he produces is sold elsewhere, exported from Jamaica, being sold in the Caribbean, being sold all over, not being sold in Jamaica. And we have to, no, but we have to encourage our farmers to understand that, if, for instance, we are in a time of drought now. If we use irrigation systems, and when we say irrigation, it doesn't have to be a very expensive system. Well, I come from a constituency where the majority of our farmers are hillside farmers. And guess what? Put up a tank on the top of the hill and run your lines down. No pump. Gravity feed, drip irrigation, and voila, you got some production going. So it's really a time for us to we have to encourage our farmers to think out of the box. Don't just sit around waiting on the next rainfall to come. Mr. Speaker, as I wrap up, let me just say, so I don't forget, that the promised production incentive for members of parliament to assist our farmers out there, that money is at the RADA office, and you should be able to have access to that money this week. This week, starting tomorrow or Thursday, you will have access to those funds. The collaboration between the public and private sectors, including the MSME sector, falls within the recognized paradigm of using the strength of strategic linkages and partnerships to generate growth. If we are to achieve robust growth, then we must continue to nurture and bolster these intersectoral linkages that facilitate the joining of productive forces and foster growth. From the policy perspective, government must remain committed to every effort to ensure business facilitation processes that are standards-driven and that increase the ease of doing business. The Prime Minister, in his wisdom, has placed in the Ministry of Industry, Commerce, Agriculture and Fisheries portfolio for the National Irrigation Commission as well, the Exim Bank and JAMPRO. What this means, Mr. Speaker, is that we have, together in one ministry, responsibility for primary produce, industrial and commercial production, irrigation, investment, marketing and financing for export and import. We have all the right ingredients, and we are challenged to make this model work. We understand that the best way to do this is through the work of our micro, small and medium enterprises. We understand that the best way to achieve growth is through the value chain approach to production, beginning with the work of our farmers, small and large, who are committed to providing the produce for local consumption, for export, and for use as raw material in the expansion of manufacturing. And I want to, in this House, we talk about linkages in the tourism sector. I want to commend the Sandals chain for something that they are doing. They are placing people to do purchasing, plan the purchasing arrangements with small farmers. I know because they are purchasing Irish potatoes from my farmers in northeast Manchester, so I know about it. And they have planned programs, and the purchasers go out there. They tell the farmers what they want. They even help them with upfront money with the planting exercise. Sandals is doing that now, and I'd like to commend it to all of the other hotel chains that are operating in Jamaica. We have heard, Mr. Speaker, the clarion call throughout the various presentations in this sectoral debate for inclusive and sustainable growth. A vertically integrated manufacturing sector that stretches backwards into agriculture and forward into the domestic market through the distributive trade and into exports through the tourism sector and external trade, particularly beginning with CARICOM, trading into CARICOM rather than us being just the single market in CARICOM. This is the engine of that growth, and so as government and as policymakers, we'll continue to be the enablers and the facilitators of our shared vision and mission to make Jamaica increase in beauty, in fellowship, and in prosperity. We can make it work. Let's come together and make it work. Thank you very much.
House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to request a recommittal of the item statements by ministers.
Those in favor? Aye. Those against? Ayes have it.
The ask you to invite the Prime Minister to make the statement that I advised you about earlier today.
Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Copies are available and will be circulated. Mr. Speaker, this Honourable House will recall that I made a preliminary statement on Petrojam on the 26th of June 2018, giving Parliament an account of Cabinet's actions on Petrojam, including an update on the administrative report we had received from the Permanent Secretary. As a footnote, Mr. Speaker, the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Energy, Science and Technology was ill during this period, and therefore the person who acted in her behalf would have attended Cabinet and would have answered questions in her behalf. A press release was issued on the 2nd of July 2018, updating the public on the decisions of Cabinet after further deliberations of the facts placed before us in the report of the Permanent Secretary, including the decision that Minister Wheatley would no longer have ministerial responsibility for the energy portfolio effective July the 4th, 2018. Minister Wheatley responded to questions on July 3rd, 2018, and I gave a commitment to Parliament on that day to bring a statement today updating the House on the transfer of the energy portfolio to the Office of the Prime Minister and other relevant matters to address the governance, management and operational weaknesses affecting Petrojam. Mr. Speaker, after reviewing the report of the Permanent Secretary and interviewing the senior management of Petrojam, the Cabinet made several conclusions and made certain decisions. In the instant matter with Petrojam, assertions have been made which seem to generally assume that permanent secretaries have significant authority over the operations of statutory bodies. Mr. Speaker, those of us who have in the past or who currently hold ministerial duties should be fully aware of the limits to the potential for permanent secretaries to intervene in the operation of entities such as self-financing statutory bodies. Yes, but the intervention itself is always limited to referring to the minister. In this regard, consideration has been given to this situation, and I have given direction for the Minister of Finance and the Public Service to bring to Cabinet proposals for amendments to the Public Bodies Management and Accountability Act in order to bring clarity to the current accountability architecture. It is important, Mr. Speaker, because sometimes the call in the public is, what did the permanent secretary do? When legally there is not a basis for action. And I thought, Mr. Speaker, that it was important, especially in building the culture of accountability, that all agents are assigned their appropriate responsibility so that the public can make the proper call on the agents who are responsible. And I think, Mr. Speaker, that there may be space to tighten up the administration and oversight of certain public bodies, particularly those that are self-financing statutory bodies. Mr. Speaker, it was clear from interviewing the acting permanent secretary and the officers of the Energy Division that the central ministry was not aware or was made aware after the fact of most of the instances of maladministration. It is important to state that, Mr. Speaker, that sometimes the central ministry only knows after things have gone wrong in the statutory agencies. And therefore, if there is a way to get the central ministry early on spot, then we could stop the runaway of maladministration. So we are looking at that as to how that could be done in terms of tightening up the PBMA. Well, from the board, but as I go on further, you will see that what we have discovered. Well, let me go on, and then you will see. Mr. Speaker, Petrojam is a self-financing public body in the form of a limited liability company jointly owned by PDV Carib of Venezuela and PCJ, a statutory body owned by the government of Jamaica. Even in that arrangement, Mr. Speaker, there is very little intervention that PCJ, the holding company, can do in Petrojam, the subsidiary, simply by virtue of the arrangements of the articles and memorandum of the company, the statutory acts under which it operates. And this is what we are discovering, that there needs to be tighter regulations there, and we need to explicitly give oversight of PCJ to the operations of Petrojam. So, Mr. Speaker, in a situation like this, for example, we should have a member from the PCJ board sitting on the Petrojam board. And that's what I'm saying. So that this is something based upon the review that we have found as a weakness, that we really need to correct that. So some governments may do it, but it is not a requirement that it is done. And therefore, what I'm saying is that in the review, we plan to make it a requirement that it is done. Mr. Speaker, it has a board, Petrojam has a board that is responsible for the good governance and management of the operations of the entity in keeping with the Public Bodies Management and Accountability Act, and is required to conform with all policy guidelines as may be set by the government through the Ministry of Finance from time to time. The board reports directly to the minister, not the permanent secretary, and takes policy directions from the minister. The cabinet is satisfied that there are indications where the previous board may have departed from policy and where certain actions, such as personally making travel arrangements, would be in breach of policy guidelines. To this end, the cabinet has acted to reconstitute the board with the appointment of Mr. Paul Ho, former chairman of Supreme Ventures, one of the largest companies in Jamaica, as the chairman of Petrojam, with Rosie Pilner, former vice president of a major bank, as a director, and Mr. Wayne Powell, former director of a major bank, as a director. The new board has had their orientation with the Petrojam staff and has started to give oversight and direction to the governance and management of the company. In light of great public concern and issues which have affected the staff, I have given the board certain general directions as now the minister responsible. One, to settle the industrial relations environment at the company and ensure that the management of the company is efficient and effective. To return the refinery to full